Dr. Elena Vasquez had seen enough war rooms to know when panic was masquerading as professionalism. The Hegemony Defense Council's flagship command center reeked of it. That particular blend of recycled air, stimulants, and the cold sweat of beings who'd run out of clever solutions 3 defeats ago. The fortress appears impervious to conventional siege tactics, announced Commander Thexral, his chitinous plates clicking with nervous energy. The Kytherian's 4 arms gestured at the holographic display with the kind of theatrical emphasis that screamed desperation. Our latest assault resulted in a 73% casualty rate before we even breached the outer perimeter. Elena sipped her coffee, real earth-grown, one of the few perks of being the galaxy's go-to-human consultant, and watched the assembled alien military leadership pretend they weren't terrified. The hologram rotated slowly, displaying what the locals had dubbed the Nightmare Fortress. Charming name. Unimaginative, but charming. 73%, repeated Admiral Velnara, her crystalline features refracting the blue light into fractured rainbows. That's not a battle. That's assisted suicide with extra steps. The defensive arrays are unlike anything in our tactical databases, added General Quarks, his massive bulk making the conference table creak ominously. The Bertalian's tusks gleamed as he spoke, though his voice carried none of his species' typical bravado. They anticipate our formations before we execute them. It's as if the fortress knows how we think. Elena set down her cup and finally spoke. Maybe it does. The room fell silent. 23 different species, each representing the pinnacle of their civilization's military prowess, all staring at the unremarkable human woman they'd hired to solve their unsolvable problem. Explain, Thexral demanded. You're approaching this like a fortress, Elena said, leaning back in her chair. Fortifications are static. They wait for you to come to them. But look at your casualty reports. She gestured lazily at the data streams flowing past the hologram. Your losses aren't from walls or gun emplacements. They're from the fortress making decisions. Admiral Velnara's crystalline form shifted, light dancing across her surface. The AI controlling the defenses is sophisticated, yes, but... Not AI, Elena interrupted. Psychology. General Quark snorted, a sound like a landslide clearing its throat. Human mysticism won't help us breach those walls, Consultant. Human psychology built those walls, General. Elena stood and walked to the holographic display, her fingers dancing through the light projection. Every defensive position is designed around predicted attack patterns. But more than that, they're designed to make you feel stupid. The room buzzed with the various noises different species made when they were offended but couldn't quite articulate why. Look at this outer ring, Elena continued, highlighting a section of the fortress. It's not just defensible, it's insulting. Those gun emplacements are positioned to create crossfire zones that force your ships into increasingly humiliating formations. You're not just losing ships, you're losing dignity. Commander Thexral's plates rattled. Dignity doesn't factor into tactical analysis, doesn't it? Elena turned back to face the assembly. How many of your commanders have requested reassignment after facing this fortress? How many are taking longer to make decisions because they're second-guessing themselves? How many are avoiding certain maneuvers because they know they'll look foolish when they fail? The silence stretched long enough to make several species visibly uncomfortable. The fortress isn't just killing your fleets, Elena said. It's killing your confidence. That's not accidental. That's engineered. Admiral Velnar leaned forward, her voice dropping to what passed for a whisper among her kind. You speak as if you've seen this before. Elena shrugged. I've seen human military thinking before. This is all the hallmarks: excessive redundancy, psychological warfare integration, and a disturbing attention to making the enemy feel personally insulted by their own tactical failures. Then you can defeat it, General Quark said, hope bleeding into his voice despite his best efforts. "I can study it," Elena corrected, "but I'll need complete access to your intelligence files. Every scan, every failed assault, every communication intercept. And I'll need the detailed schematics your reconnaissance drones managed to capture before they were turned into very expensive fireworks." Thexrau's four arms moved in a complex gesture that Elena had learned meant either agreement or a death threat, depending on the context. "You'll have everything we have. But understand, Dr. Vasquez, we've tried everything. Every tactical doctrine, every weapon system, every alliance strategy in our databases." "That's your problem," Elena said, finishing her coffee. "You're thinking with your databases. Whoever built that fortress is thinking with something else entirely." She moved toward the exit, then paused. "One more thing. When you compile those files, include the psychological profiles of your failed commanders. Not the official reports, the real ones. The ones that mention the nightmares." Admiral Velnara's crystalline form flickered. "How did you know about the nightmares?" Elena smiled, and for just a moment, the assembled military leaders of 23 civilizations felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air. "Lucky guess." The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the war room in a kind of silence that followed uncomfortable revelations. Elena walked the corridor toward her assigned quarters, her mind already racing through possibilities and probabilities. She'd lied, of course. It hadn't been a lucky guess at all. She knew about the nightmares because she designed them. 3 hours later, Elena's quarters had been transformed into a hurricane of holographic data. Tactical readouts cascaded down the walls like digital waterfalls while she sat cross-legged on her bed, manipulating projections with casual expertise that would have impressed the alien commanders if they could have seen past their own terror long enough to appreciate technique. Query: shall I organize the intelligence files chronologically or by tactical significance? Her personal AI, Marcus, materialized as a shimmering blue outline beside her desk. The irony of a name wasn't lost on her, though she'd grown numb to it over the years. Neither. Sort them by psychological impact indicators. Elena pulled up a schematic that made her stomach clench with recognition. Cross-reference with stress markers in the surviving commander's reports. Processing. Dr. Vasquez. Preliminary analysis suggests an unusual pattern in the fortress design philosophy. The defensive installations appear to prioritize demoralization over maximum lethality. Elena rotated the hologram slowly, her fingers tracing lines that existed only in her memory. Every angle, every calculated sight line, every deliberately visible weakness that wasn't actually weak at all. 15 years of dust couldn't hide what she poured her soul into creating. Tell me something, Marcus. What would you call a defensive system that makes its enemies feel personally stupid while they die? Rhetorically speaking, efficient. Practically speaking, cruel. I called it the Medusa Protocol. The words tasted like ash. The idea was that defeating it wouldn't just require superior firepower. It would require the attackers to confront their own fundamental assumptions about warfare. The AI's avatar flickered, processing. There is no record of a Medusa Protocol in any human military database. That's because it was classified above your clearance level, then buried deeper than a black hole's event horizon. Elena pulled up another section of the schematics. Project Gorgon. We were tasked with designing the ultimate defensive installation, not just to stop invasions, but to make potential invaders think twice about ever trying again. And you succeeded. We succeeded too well. Elena's laugh held no humor. The testing simulations broke our volunteer assault teams. Not their ships, their minds. Command decided that any weapon that could traumatize professional soldiers just by fighting them might violate several interstellar treaties that didn't even exist yet. She gestured at the fortress spinning slowly in the holographic display. Recognize the outer ring configuration? The seemingly random placement of the heavy cannons that actually creates perfect psychological pressure points? The way the defensive barriers funnel attackers into positions where they can see exactly how outmatched they are before they die. Correlation confirmed. This fortress incorporates 73% of the Medusa protocol specifications. 73% of what I gave them. Elena corrected grimly. Whoever built this improved on my work. The AI's avatar turned toward her, a gesture that was purely programmed but felt disturbingly human. Dr. Vasquez, according to classified records, the Gorgon project team consisted of only 2 primary architects. You and Dr. Marcus Chun, my research partner, my closest friend, and officially a casualty of a transport accident 5 years ago. Elena stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the distant stars. Unofficially, the man who just declared war on the galaxy using blueprints I helped create. The probability of Dr. Chen's survival was calculated at 0.003%. Marcus always was good with impossible odds. Elena turned back to the display, where new data streams were integrating with her analysis. Look at these attack patterns, Marcus. The fortress doesn't just counter standard tactics. It anticipates them. It knows how different species think, how they approach problems, what their cultural blind spots are. Elaborate. The Kytherians lost ships because the fortress exploited their need for geometric perfection in their formations. The Bertalians got slaughtered because it baited them into frontal assaults that appealed to their sense of honor. The crystalline fleet got shattered because the fortress used light-based attacks that turned their own refractive bodies into weapons against them. Elena manipulated the data streams, pulling up casualty reports that painted a picture of systematic psychological warfare. Marcus isn't just using my designs. He's using everything we learned about xenopsychology during the research phase. He knows exactly how to make each species defeat itself. Query: if you design these systems, you must also know their weaknesses. That's what's keeping me awake at night. Elena sank back onto her bed, surrounded by the ghosts of her own tactical brilliance. I built one weakness into the Medusa protocol, one single point of failure that could bring down the entire system. And Dr. Chen would know about this weakness. Marcus helped me design it. Elena closed her eyes, remembering late nights spent arguing over theoretical attack vectors and moral implications. The question is whether he was arrogant enough to leave it intact or smart enough to eliminate it. The AI processes information with the kind of digital silence that meant complex calculations were occurring. Dr. Vasquez, there is another possibility, which is Dr. Chen may have retained the weakness intentionally. As a message to you. Elena opened her eyes and stared at the fortress schematics floating around her like accusatory angels. A message saying what? Come and stop me. The room fell quiet except for the subtle hum of processing power and the distant thrum of the ship's engines. Elena studied her own work, now turned against the galaxy, and felt the weight of unintended consequences settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Marcus, compile everything we have on recent Fortress communications, particularly any transmissions that weren't directed at military targets. Processing. Dr. Vasquez, may I ask what you intend to do with this information? Elena stood up, her decision crystallized with the hard clarity of a tactical assessment. I'm going to finish a conversation that got interrupted by a very inconvenient fake death. The next morning found Elena in Admiral Velnara's private strategy chamber, watching the crystalline officer's rainbow refractions dance across classified star charts like a living aurora. The chamber was smaller than the main war room, designed for the kind of conversations that never made it into official reports. You want access to our deep intelligence networks, Velnara said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested skepticism. That's beyond the scope of your consulting agreement. The scope of my agreement just expanded. Elena gestured at the tactical displays surrounding them. Your enemy isn't following conventional patterns because they're not a conventional enemy. I need to understand their long-term strategy, not just their immediate tactics. And you believe our intelligence networks will provide this understanding? Elena smiled the kind of smile that had made nervous generals throughout human space second-guess their career choices. I believe your intelligence networks have been compromised from the beginning, and whoever's running that fortress has been feeding you carefully selected information to ensure you attack exactly when and how they want you to. The admission hung in the air like toxic gas. Velnara's crystalline form flickered through several color spectrums before settling on a deep crimson that Elena had learned indicated either rage or profound embarrassment. Explain your reasoning. Simple pattern recognition. Elena pulled up the fortress's construction timeline. This installation didn't appear overnight. Something this complex would require years of preparation, massive resource allocation, and detailed intelligence about every major fleet composition in the hegemony. Yet none of your surveillance networks detected it until it started shooting. The sector was considered strategically insignificant. By whom? Elena's fingers danced through the holographic interface, pulling up shipping manifests and resource allocation records. Who designated that sector as unimportant? Who approved the survey schedules that somehow miss a construction project the size of a small moon? Velnara's form shifted to a darker shade as the implication sank in. You're suggesting internal collaboration. I'm suggesting someone's been playing a very long game, and you've been dancing to their tune since before the first foundation stone was laid. Elena highlighted a series of data points that formed an uncomfortable pattern. Look at these intelligence reports from the past 3 years. Every major fleet movement, every strategic planning session, every technological development, all reported through channels that ultimately trace back to 12 key intelligence nodes. Those nodes represent our most trusted assets. Those nodes represent the most efficient way to ensure your enemy knows exactly what you're planning before you plan it. Elena pulled up communication logs that made Velnara's colors cycle through the entire visible spectrum. Now watch what happens when I cross-reference these intelligence reports with the fortress's attack patterns. The holographic display exploded into a web of connections that painted a picture of systematic manipulation. Every failed assault had been preceded by intelligence reports that led the hegemony forces into exactly the wrong tactical decisions. Every strategic adjustment had been countered before it could be implemented. Every surprise attack had been expected. "This is impossible," Velnara whispered, though her chromatic display suggested she was already accepting the impossible truth. The coordination required, the timing, the sheer scope of the deception, the scope of someone who's been planning this for years and has intimate knowledge of both hegemony protocols and human strategic thinking. Elena closed the display and met Velnara's multifaceted gaze directly. I need access to those intelligence nodes, not the official channels, the personal communication logs, the private message archives, the data they thought no one would ever see. That level of access could be considered treason. Admiral, with respect, you're already committing treason against your own species every time you follow intelligence that's been poisoned from the source. Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to the kind of tone that preceded either alliance or assassination. The question is whether you want to commit intelligent treason or continue committing the stupid kind. Velnara's form cycled through colors that had no names in human language before settling on a shade that Elena interpreted as grim determination. What exactly are you looking for? Communication patterns that don't match official protocols. Personal messages that reference shared knowledge or inside jokes. Anything that suggests a relationship deeper than professional intelligence sharing. Elena paused, choosing her next words carefully. And any mention of someone called the architect, The reaction was immediate and telling. Velnara's entire crystalline structure flared bright white before cycling rapidly through emergency warning colors. You know that designation. It appeared in 3 separate intelligence reports over the past 6 months, Velnara admitted, always in reference to the fortress's mysterious commander. We assumed it was a code name. It's not a code name. It's a job description. Elena stood and walked to the viewport, where the distant glow of the fortress was barely visible as a malevolent star. The architect doesn't just build fortresses. He builds scenarios, entire strategic situations designed to produce specific psychological outcomes. And you know this how? Elena turned back to face the Admiral, her expression carrying the weight of old sins and older regrets. Because I taught him everything he knows about turning warfare into psychology and psychology into art. The silence that followed was broken only by the subtle hum of the ship's systems and the barely audible sound of Velnara's crystalline form processing information at frequencies beyond human hearing. Dr. Vasquez, the Admiral said finally, I believe you should see the deep intelligence files immediately. 2 hours later, Elena sat in a shielded data chamber surrounded by information that should have been impossible to obtain. Personal communication logs, private message archives, and classified intelligence reports formed a digital constellation around her chair. Marcus processed the data streams, while Elena looked for the patterns she dreaded finding. Correlation detected, the AI announced. 17 separate intelligence assets have been receiving personal communications from an untraced source using obsolete human military encryption protocols. Show me the message content. The communications appear to be philosophical discussions about strategic theory, war ethics, and theoretical applications of psychological warfare principles. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. Marcus, analyze the communication style. Compare it to archive logs from the Gorgon Project. Processing. Dr. Vasquez, the linguistic patterns, theoretical references, and philosophical frameworks match archive communications from Dr. Marcus Chun with 97% certainty. He's been recruiting them, Elena said softly, not as spies, as students. She pulled up the intelligence assets profiles, cross-referencing them with the fortress's attack patterns and strategic implementations. The picture that emerged was horrifyingly elegant in its simplicity. Marcus hadn't just survived a supposed death. He'd spent 5 years building a network of admirers throughout the hegemony intelligence community, teaching them to think like humans while they fed him everything he needed to predict and counter their species' responses. Marcus, trace the communication pathways. I need to know where these messages originated. Dr. Vasquez, the source location has been masked through 17 relay nodes, but the signal path suggests origin from within the fortress itself. Elena smiled, though there was no humor in it. Then it's time to send a message of my own. The main war room had been transformed into something resembling organized chaos. Elena stood at the center of it all, surrounded by holographic displays that mapped not just the fortress's defenses, but the psychological profiles of every species preparing to assault it. The assembled commanders watched her with the desperate attention of drowning beings offered a rope. The fortress will fall within 6 hours, Elena announced without preamble. Not because it would overwhelm it, but because we're going to ask it nicely to surrender. General Corks's tusks gleamed as he leaned forward. Consultant, perhaps the stress of investigation has affected your judgment. My judgment is the only thing keeping your fleets from becoming decorative debris. Elena gestured at the tactical display, where her modifications to their attack plan glowed like surgical incisions. You've been fighting this fortress like it's a defensive installation. It's not. It's a teaching tool. Commander Thexrel's plates clicked nervously. Explain. Every attack you've launched has been designed to fail in specific ways that demonstrate human strategic superiority. You're not casualties of war. your students in a very expensive classroom. Elena pulled up communication logs that made several commanders visibly flinch. The fortress's creator has been studying your responses, refining his understanding of how different species process defeat, humiliation, and fear. To what end? Admiral Velnara asked, her crystalline form cycling through suspicious hues. To make you afraid of humanity itself. Elena's words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Think about it. Every time you fail against this fortress, you're not just losing ships. You're learning that human military thinking is categorically superior to your own. You're being conditioned to see us as insurmountable opponents. The silence that followed was a kind that preceded either epiphanies or executions. But you said the fortress will fall. Thexral ventured. Because I'm going to use the one weakness I built into the original design. A psychological backdoor that requires the fortress's commander to make a choice between his mission and his ego. Elena smiled with the kind of cold precision that made entire species reconsider their life choices. And I know exactly which choice he'll make. 3 hours later, Elena stood alone in a shielded communication chamber, staring at a blank screen that connected directly to the fortress's command center. Around her, the hegemony fleet moved into positions that looked like standard assault formations, but were actually something far more subtle. "Hello, Marcus," she said to the empty screen. The response came immediately, as if he'd been waiting for a call for 5 years. "Elena!" Marcus Chen's face materialized in the display, looking remarkably unchanged except for the eyes that now held depths she didn't recognize. "I was beginning to think you'd never figure it out." "I figured it out in the first 5 minutes. I spent the rest of the time being impressed by your improvements to my work." "Our work," Marcus corrected, "though I admit I've added some refinements you might not approve of, such as turning psychological warfare into a galactic educational program." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying undertones of genuine affection mixed with something darker. The galaxy needed to understand what they were dealing with. Humanity isn't just another species competing for resources. We're a fundamental change in how warfare itself functions. And you decided to teach them this lesson by traumatizing their military leadership? I decided to teach them before they made the mistake of actually fighting us. Marcus leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Elena, do you have any idea what would happen if the major galactic powers decided to unite against Earth? Not skirmishes or trade disputes, actual war. We'd win. We'd exterminate them." Marcus's voice carried the weight of calculated certainty. "Not defeat them, not conquer them. We'd accidentally commit genocide just by fighting the way humans naturally fight. Our psychological warfare capabilities alone would shatter their civilizations." Elena studied her former partner's face, seeing the logic that had driven him to this elaborate demonstration. "So you decided to inoculate them against us." "I decided to make sure they never test us." Marcus gestured at something off-screen. "Every species in that fleet attacking my fortress is learning the same lesson. Human strategic thinking operates on levels they can't match. Better they learn it here, against one rogue human with stolen designs, than later against Earth itself." "Noble," Elena said dryly, "except for the part where you're using my psychological warfare protocols to drive alien commanders insane. Our protocols. And they're not going insane, they're gaining perspective." Elena smiled the kind of smile that had once made Marcus reconsider arguments he'd thought he was winning. "That's where you're wrong. You use my designs, but you forgot the most important principle I built into them, which is psychological warfare works both ways." Elena's fingers moved across her control interface, initiating the attack sequence she'd spent 3 hours perfecting. "You've been so focused on teaching the galaxy to fear humanity that you forgot humans can also be taught to fear themselves." On the tactical display, The hegemony fleet moved into formation, not to attack the fortress, but to demonstrate something far more unsettling. Every ship positioned itself to create a perfect geometric pattern that spelled out a message in mathematical concepts that transcended language barriers. Marcus's expression shifted as he realized what he was seeing. That's impossible. The coordination required, the cultural integration, the unified command structure. The galaxy's military leaders learning to think like humans, Elena said softly. Which was always the real lesson, wasn't it? Not that they should fear us, but that they could become us. The fortress's defensive systems activated automatically, then hesitated as their targeting computers tried to process an attack formation that was simultaneously a philosophical statement, a mathematical proof, and a psychological evaluation. Elena, what have you done? I've shown them that your fortress isn't a demonstration of human superiority. It's a demonstration of human limitation. Elena watched the fortress's systems cycling through increasingly frantic recalculations. You build a defense system that could anticipate any alien attack, but you never programmed it to handle aliens who've learned to attack like humans. The fortress's weapons powered down as its central processing core encountered the one scenario Marcus had never considered, an enemy that had evolved beyond the parameters of his psychological modeling. The fortress is surrendering, Marcus said, wonder and horror warring in his voice. The fortress is learning, Elena corrected, just like its students. On the display, Marcus leaned back in his command chair, his expression cycling through emotions Elena remembered from their research days. Frustration, admiration, and grudging respect. You realize what this means, he said finally. It means the galaxy just got a lot more interesting. Elena smiled, watching the fortress's defensive barriers lower in what could only be described as a gesture of philosophical concession. And it means humanity just gained 23 species who understand us well enough to be truly dangerous allies. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying genuine appreciation. Elena, you magnificent, terrifying woman. Do you realize you just accidentally created the most powerful military alliance in galactic history? I realize I just solved your problem, and mine simultaneously. Elena prepared to terminate the connection. The galaxy doesn't need to fear humanity, Marcus. It needs to fear what humanity and the galaxy can become together. The communication link closed, leaving Elena alone in the chamber with the soft hum of electronics and the distant sound of victory celebrations echoing through the ship's corridors. She sat quietly for a moment, considering the irony that she'd solved the problem of human psychological warfare by teaching their enemies to use it against them, and in doing so, had created something entirely new. Outside the viewport, the fortress hung in space like a monument to the complexity of good intentions, while around it, 23 different species celebrated their first victory, achieved not by being stronger than humans, but by becoming something human-adjacent. Elena smiled and made a mental note to update her consulting rates. Teaching the galaxy to think like humans was apparently going to be a growth industry.